and discovered Lake Nyassa. In August 1860 they returned to the Victoria Falls. Early in the following year, Bishop Mackenzie and his missionary staff arrived at the mouth of the Zambesi. In March an exploration of the Rovuma was made on board the Pioneer, the exploring party returning afterwards to Lake Nyassa, where they remained a considerable time. The 30th of January 1862 was signalized by the arrival of Mrs. Livingstone, and by the addition of another steamer, the Lady Nyassa, but the happiness of reunion was very transient. It was but a short time before the enthusiastic Bishop Mackenzie succumbed to the unhealthiness of the climate, and on the 27th of April Mrs. Livingstone expired in her husband's arms. A second investigation of the Rovuma soon followed, and at the end of November the doctor returned to the Zambesi and reascended the Shire. In the spring of 1803 he lost his companion, Mr. Thornton, and as his brother and Dr. Kirk were both much debilitated, he insisted upon their return to Europe, while he himself returned for the third time to Lake Nyassa, and completed the hydrological survey which already he had begun. A few months later once more found him at the mouth of the Zambesi. Thence he crossed over to Zanzibar, and after 5 years' absence arrived in London, where he published his work, The Exploration of the Zambesi and its Affluents. Still unwearied and insatiable in his longings, he was back again in Zanzibar at the commencement of 1866, ready to begin his fourth journey, this time attended only by a few sepoys and negroes. Witnessing on his way some horrible scenes which were perpetrated as the result of the prosecution of the slave trade, he proceeded to Makalose, on the shores of Lake Nyassa, where nearly all his attendants deserted him, and returned to Zanzibar with the report that he was dead. Dr. Livingstone meanwhile was not only alive but undaunted in his determination to visit the country between the two lakes Nyassa and Tanganyika. With none to guide him except a few natives, he crossed the Loangona, and in the following April discovered Lake Liemba. Here he lay for a whole month hovering between life and death, but rallying a little he pushed on the north shore of Lake Moero. Taking up his quarters at Cazambe for 6 weeks, he made two separate explorations of the lake, and then started farther northwards, intending to reach Ujiji, an important town upon Lake Tanganyika. Overtaken, however, by floods, and again abandoned by his servants, he was obliged to retrace his steps. 6 weeks afterwards he had made his way southwards to the great lake Bangweolo, whence once more he started towards Tanganyika. This last effort was most trying, and the doctor had grown so weak that he was obliged to be carried, but he reached Ujiji, where he was gratified by finding some supplies that had been thoughtfully forwarded to him by the Oriental Society at Calcutta. His great aim now was to ascend the lake, and reach the sources of the Nile. On the 21st of September he was at Bambare, in the country of the cannibal Manyuema, upon the Lualaba, the river afterwards ascertained by Stanley to be the Upper Zaire or Congo. At Mamobela the doctor was ill for 24 days, tended only by 3 followers who continued faithful, but in July he made a vigorous effort, and although he was reduced to a skeleton, made his way back to Ujiji. During this long time no tidings of Livingstone reached Europe, and many were the misgivings lest the rumours of his death were only too true. He was himself, too, almost despairing as to receiving any help. But help was closer at hand than he thought. On the 3rd of November, only 11 days after his return to Ujiji, some gunshots were heard within half a mile of the lake. The doctor went out to ascertain whence they proceeded, and had not gone far before a white man stood before him. "You are Dr. Livingstone, I presume?" said the stranger, raising his cap. "Yes, sir, I am Dr. Livingstone, and I am happy to see you," answered the doctor, smiling kindly. The two shook each other warmly by the hand. The new arrival was Henry Stanley, the correspondent of the New York Herald, who had been sent out by Mr. Bennett, the editor, in search of the great African explorer. On receiving his orders in October 1870, without a day's unnecessary delay, he had embarked at Bombay for Zanzibar, and after a journey involving considerable peril, had arrived safely at Ujiji. Very soon the two travellers found themselves on the best of terms, and set out together on an excursion to the north of Tanganyika. They proceeded as far as Cape Magala, and decided that the chief outlet of the lake must be an affluent of the Lualaba, a conclusion that was subsequently confirmed by Cameron. Towards the end of the year Stanley began to prepare to return. Livingstone accompanied him as far as Kwihara, and on the 3rd of the following March they parted. "You have done for me what few men would venture to do. I am truly grateful," said Livingstone. Stanley could scarcely repress his tears as he expressed his hope that the doctor might be spared to return to his friends safe and well. "Good bye," said Stanley, choked with emotion. "Good bye," answered the veteran feebly. Thus they parted, and in July 1872 Stanley had landed at Marseilles. Again David Livingstone resumed his researches in the interior. After remaining 5 months at Kwihara, he gathered together a retinue consisting of his faithful followers. Susi, Chuma, Amoda, and Jacob Wainwright, and 56 men sent to him by Stanley, and lost no time in proceeding towards the south of Tanganyika. In the course of the ensuing month the caravan encountered some frightful storms, but succeeded in reaching Mura. They had previously been in extreme drought, which was now followed by the rainy season, which entailed the loss of many of the beasts of burden, in consequence of the bites of the tsetse. On the 24th of January they were at Chitunque, and in April, after rounding the east of Lake Bangweolo, they made their way towards the village of Chitambo. At this point it was that Livingstone had parted company with certain slave dealers, who had carried the information to old Alvez that the missionary traveller would very likely proceed by way of Loanda to Kazonde. By the 13th of June, the very day before Negoro reckoned on obtaining from Mrs. Weldon the letter which should be the means of securing him $100,000, tidings were circulated in the district that on the 1st of May Dr. Livingstone had breathed his last. The report proved perfectly true. On the 29th of April the caravan had reached the village of Chitambo, the doctor so unwell that he was carried on a litter. The following night he was in great pain, and after repeatedly murmuring in a low voice, "Oh dear, oh dear," he fell into a kind of stupor. A short time afterwards he called up Susi, and having asked for some medicine, told his attendant that he should not require anything more. "You can go now." At about 4 o'clock next morning, when an anxious visit was made to his room, the doctor was found kneeling by his bedside, his head in his hands, in the attitude of prayer. Susi touched him, but his forehead was icy with the coldness of death. He had died in the night. His body was carried by those who loved him, and in spite of many obstacles was brought to Zanzibar, whence, 9 months after his death, it was conveyed to England. On the 12th of April, 1874, it was interred in Westminster Abbey, counted worthy to be deposited among those whom the country most delights to honour. End of Part the Second, Chapter 14. Recording by Alex C. Talander, Davis, California. www.alexctalander.com